So welcome everyone to this first in the second series of ILX virtual sessions. Our first series of 4 seemed to be very popular. Got really good feedback that they actually helped, they were informative, and interesting, we had quite a few people looking at the YouTube videos as well. So following requests, we've launched a second series. And the two that we're going to look at are, as it says on the screen at the moment, first of all, emerging challenges for L&D and HR leads. So particularly we're looking at what's happening across 2020 and 2021. And next Tuesday, we're going to be looking at long-term strategies for managing virtual teams. So managing virtual teams was one of our most popular sessions that we ran last time. That was kind of a reactionary piece. How can you immediately start managing people who are working from home? This one's going to be more of a long-term strategy for doing this. So that's what we're going to be looking at next Tuesday at the same time as well. So let me run through a couple of domestic points for you, the same as I always like to do. Yeah, and keep those hellos coming in and where you're coming in from as well. It's always nice to see. So our domestic points, you start the session muted. However, you are welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question anytime. Those of you who've been on a session with me know that I love to be interrupted. I love questions coming in. The interactivity is a really good and healthy thing. Now, another way to be interactive is to use the questions box. And this is one of the reasons that I've asked you to say hello and do a little comment on where you're calling in from. It just means that you get used to using that questions box as well. Now, this particular session has a lot of information that we're going to be running through. So I'm going to advise a couple of things. First of all, if something particularly piques your interest as we go through, make a note of it. Notes help turn learning into actions. Secondly, remember you can do little shortcuts such as Control Print Screen. This will take a snapshot of whatever's on the screen at the moment, and if you have something like a Word document or a slide deck open, you can then copy and paste that immediately in, and you can do that live as we're going through this session. However, because this one has so much information, we're also really going to encourage you probably to view it twice. Once now, once when it goes up on YouTube. The full thing will be put up on YouTube so you can view it at your leisure. And of course, the great thing there is you can click pause or rewind to recover particular aspects as we go through as well. Okay, let me share the agenda with you as we flow through. So our path today, the first thing we're going to look at is some of the research around the emerging challenges, because there's been a lot of voices in this field. I'm going to give you a very, very quick overview of where our research is coming from. We'll then look backwards at some of the top issues of 2019, because it's nice to actually go on a little bit of a journey with this. We'll have a quick look at some of the reactionary issues that affected us in HR and learning and development in 2020. And of course, I'm talking about January, February, March, April, May, where COVID was a big, big player. And then the main bulk of what we're going to be looking at is looking at the big issues and challenges that are coming as we move along 2020 into a post-COVID-19 world. And that does not mean that COVID-19 is going to disappear. It just means that we have a new way of working. So we'll be exploring the challenges that will be coming up there. My name's Nick. You can call me whatever you want to. I'm very, very difficult to insult. And once again, keep the questions coming in as we go through. I love being interrupted, always fine. So let's start off and have a look at where we've pulled this information from. And this all started with a good colleague and friend of mine who's a head of learning, talking about some of the groups that he was connected with and some of the issues that were being discussed in those leadership groups, and particularly the learning and development leadership groups. There is a wealth of information that we can call upon here. So up on the screen at the moment, I've broken it down into kind of areas. We have people like the CIPD, Personal Today, and the HR Trend Institute. We have publications such as Forbes, Harvard Business Review, The Economist, and lots of newspapers. Every newspaper is a specialist on this and has an opinion on this. And of course, there's some wonderful things on places like TED Talks as well. One of my favorite places to draw information from are the thought leadership companies, the data-driven companies, the companies that are trying out new things and new ways of working, often before the rest of us. I'm talking about the Googles, the Microsofts, and others of the like. And of course, we have some of the big consultancies who are weighing in on this as well: Deloitte, Accenture, McKinsey, and the rest. Now, what I found fascinating doing this, and I've got to say, I've put quite a few days worth of research into bringing this WebEx together. There wasn't a consensus. Across all of these places that I've mentioned, there wasn't a consensus. There were opinions, but not consensus. So what we've tried to do for you here is look right the way across the literature, the programming, the opinion articles, and identify the big 5 challenges and the big 3 questions that our employers are asking. You'll see at the bottom there as well, I've put in journals such as Nature and New Scientist. I'm a big fan at looking at the scientific view from a psychology point of view of what is happening next and how it will shape the future of our work as well. So that's the research. Now let's go backwards a little bit and look at some of the big challenges that, of course, you were all familiar with in 2019. One of the big ones that was coming in from 2017, 2018, and 2019 was engaging across generational differences. Each generation is different and needs to be engaged at work in a slightly different way. A big thread, of course, was digitization and automation. Now, this is something that's both affecting the workforce an awful lot, and we are being encouraged to get the workforce to think about. As part of the general drive for efficiency and customer value and patient value, we saw lots of implementation of lean programs and agile initiatives. And sometimes that meant a really big focus on headcount. Now, I'm going to come to that one later because it informs one of the big challenges that we face in this post-COVID-19 world as well. We had measuring the impact of talent and development. That's been an ongoing theme for about a decade. How can we get those Kirkpatrick values to actually stand up, those Kirkpatrick measures? How can we measure the impact that human resources and training from learning and development has on the productivity or the engagement in an organization? A big thrust on one that I was really pleased to see was the ongoing movement for equality, diversity, and inclusion. And I don't know about you guys, but I was doing a lot of work around this arena, particularly across 2018 and 2019. And it was, it was a pleasure to be doing that work as well. You're doing something good and something that's going to have a real impact when you're working on these kind of projects. Well-being and resilience was one of the beautiful things that started to get highlighted when we started to look at equality, diversity, and inclusion, because of course, mental health starts to pop up. And then that leads to this much stronger idea of well-being and resilience within a workforce. This is all really, really good stuff. We started to see the rise on a large scale of flexible working and different types of working contracts. And we also started to see a big move in philosophy from leadership teams, moving from hierarchies to how we can actually empower our talent, give them more autonomy, and get them to start driving the organization a lot more. But there was one thing probably that stuck out across 2019 more than anything else. Activating managers and getting engagement. That was the big piece, whether you're in HR or learning and development. How can we engage people in the processes? How can we engage people in the training? And that is a theme that we saw carrying on most definitely into 2020 as well. So moving forward, of course, we had this big event. It affected an awful lot of people. It's caused a lot of deaths, a lot of sadness, a lot of opportunities as well. We'll come to that in a little bit. Here are 6 of the big items that we started to need to deal with at the start and in the first half of 2020. The first thing, of course, was this big move to virtual working and safeguarding jobs. You don't need me to tell you that. You've just been experiencing it for the last few months. The second one was how many of our organizations were forced to what we call pivot. Now that really means is rapid adaptation and change, the use of new tools, the use of new automation processes. We saw a lot of work being placed in particularly the HR field in terms of providing new guidance and policies to support home working, and that's everything around home working as well. So how do you run an appraisal when people are working from home? How do you set targets? How do you keep track of what's going on? And that placed a big burden on most HR teams. Well-being and resilience went into overdrive because it needed to as well. And of course, when people are working from home, that meant a high level of autonomy naturally occurred. And this frightened the life out of an awful lot of managers, not just the micromanaging managers, but almost anyone. How do I know what my staff are up to? How can I support them? How do I know what they're feeling? So this handling unexpected autonomy was quite a big piece as well. Sorry, my apologies. And another big one was it handling extreme workloads of furloughed staff. Sorry, extreme workloads and furloughed staff. There was kind of a split, wasn't there? For some teams, they suddenly found themselves doing 60-hour weeks. Some teams, they suddenly found themselves sitting at home wondering whether they had a job. Now, another thing that happened, of course, was we saw the rise of a whole new suite of meeting styles and things like that. So I'm just going to go to our next slide.
Nick, the sound's not synced up.
No, don't. Jen, call him. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm gonna text a couple pictures of that. Oh. Oh. Oh boy. What's up?
Tony, I can see you when you're
We can all see you.
Sorry, guys, I think the sound was out of sync there. My apologies. But you can all see what was happening quite beautifully. We had this great new way of working that caused all kinds of complications and comedy. And by the way, if you want to see some better videos, just put into YouTube awkward Zoom or WhatsApp team meetings. I would say though, some of these are definitely a little bit risky without a doubt. Okay, let's move on and have a look at these big challenges that are going to be facing us in the post-COVID-19 world as well. So we've identified 5 of the things that really HR teams and L&D teams are likely to be really focusing on over the next 12 to 24 months. And here they are. The first one is this big move from a reactive change to a proactive entrepreneurial spirit. A lot of organizations have suddenly found opportunities in this new world. Ways to deliver new value to their customers, different ways to look after and engage their patients or service users. And that means leaders have clicked onto this idea that actually, even more so than ever before, innovation, innovation, innovation can be a really big driving force. And one of the big things that we're looking at in this session is how can we move from reactive change to proactive entrepreneurial spirit? How can we support that as an HR or L&D team? The next one, well-being and mental health. And as it says on the screen, like we've never done it before. This has become an incredibly important thing. And it doesn't matter where in the world you are right now, the chances are that there are people in your workforce who have been or will be suffering. So we have an ethical duty. We also have a ruthless productivity element, which says we need to look after those people as well. Number 3, protecting the sense of team when the team may be split and making sure that they can connect to our organizational goals, our culture, our values. For example, in Germany at the moment, a lot of people are working in a split shift system where half the team goes into the office, half the team works from home. And we're seeing that as a growing trend in the UK, France, Portugal and Spain as well. I don't know about India, I don't know about Russia, I don't know about some of the other places in the world, but how do you keep that sense of team when all of this is going on? This means that there is even more weight and pressure on human resources and L&D teams to be enablers, not just controllers or risk-adverse teams, but people who actually drive and help with things like virtual flexible working, inclusion programs, and so many other elements as well. And also the ongoing trend of digitization and automation, because, ladies and gentlemen, it seems to be on steroids right now. Companies that are succeeding are companies that are embracing these models. So I'm going to give you a couple of nice videos at the end here, or video links that you can go away and investigate, and also a couple of quick pointers for how this can directly impact HR and L&D teams as well. Now, it isn't just the big challenges that we're facing, it's also questions that our workforce are asking. So here are the top 3 questions we believe people are asking of their workforces right now. Now, this is cross-generational as well. Often when people see this, they think, oh, this is just about Generation X or after that, but actually it's bigger than that. 2 of these questions are very open. People are actively asking them. One of these questions is what we call an unconscious question. So I'm just going to ask everyone, and if you could put your answers in the question box for me, which of these do you think it is that's the unconscious question? This is not a test, it's not an exam, but have a little think about that. Do you think it's about fair and inclusivity? Do you think it's about am I valued? Or do you think it's about do I or we have a purpose? Put that in the question box for me now, if you would. What are your thoughts and views on that? Which of these questions do you think is important, but is being asked unconsciously? Let's see if we get any thoughts coming in there. I can see you're taking a time to think about it. That's okay. Am I valued from Helen? Thank you. Again, it's not a test. It's not an exam. Just curious as to what you might think here. Sarah says, do we have a purpose? Okay, so absolutely, Sarah, that is the one that's the unconscious big question. And towards the end of this session, we're going to be having a little bit of chat about that because it's a really important one to access. Yep, absolutely, Tony. You're absolutely right. Do we have purpose? The reason this is an unconscious question is because it's a question that can hurt. If you ask this question and the answer is no, it has a direct impact on our sense of self, our sense of value, our sense of well-being. So this is a question that is sitting in the back of people's minds a lot of the time. What we're going to try and do is bring it to the front of their minds as well. Issa says, are we ready for rapid digitalization? Yeah, I think that's a big one, definitely. And it's probably a fear that is sitting in the back of people's minds as well. Okay, let's move forward and actually start dealing with these. We promised you in the outline we'd identify these big challenges and also look at solutions as well. So that's what we're going to do now for you. So we'll start off by having a look at the big 5 challenges for HR and L&D functions. And the first one of those we're playing with is this one, this idea of moving from reactive change to actually really enhancing and enabling a proactive entrepreneurial spirit. This is all about innovation, people. It's all about how do we protect and boost innovation across our organizations. So what we've done is we've broken this down into some of the issues that might be holding us back and how we can help as an HR lead or an L&D department in boosting these things forward. The first one is change tiredness. Even before everything happened, everyone was being hit over their head with change, transformation, and change. Now, there's never going to be a time when there isn't change, but we also know that our workforce can suffer from change tiredness. It's very, very easy. Top tip here is reignite people's passion with their sense of purpose. That sense of purpose can really, really drive and ignite so much positivity. Human beings are capable of some really, really terrible things, but we are also capable of some really wonderful things. When a person or a team or an organization has a sense of purpose, it means they can really drive through some positive changes. Tony, you said 60 to 70% of change efforts fail. I haven't seen that statistic, but I find it very easy to believe, most definitely. And a lot of the time it's because change is forced upon people instead of people being given a purpose and a goal and being enabled to achieve that purpose. If any of you took part in our Leading Change workshop that we did in our first series of virtual WebExes, you'll know that the key here is to enable people, and it's all about igniting that sense of purpose within them. Amazing things happen when you do that. And this is a thread that we're not going to leave alone as we go through this. So here is one single big piece of advice. We're going to cover so much in this session. I really want to try and highlight some of the most important things. If you are in HR, if you are in L&D, then please, 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 for everyone's benefit, make sure every team has a clear mission and vision, because brilliant things happen when they do. Okay, let's have a look at some of our other barriers. And again, we are going to keep coming back to that big sense of purpose piece. Second barrier, fixed mindsets, not growth mindsets. We are under a lot of pressure, definitely. But helping people to get a growth mindset can be a big game changer in helping them to embrace new models, new ways of working, and unleash those innovation points as well. So here are some ways that you can do this. One of my favorites, something that I'm very close to, is embedding a coaching culture. When you embed a coaching culture, you are teaching people to ask, how can this happen? Randy said, very fruitful issue. Please discuss solution in brief. Randy, I'm not sure I'm quite catching that. So feel free to enlarge on that in the questions box, and I will keep an eye out on that with one eye and come back to you on that as well. As we go through this, I'm going to be doing a light touch on a lot of solutions and hopefully giving you and pointing you in more direction as well. So if you would like to find out more about things such as how do we ignite purpose, then absolutely get in touch. We can help you lots more with that. It's a big thing though. It's the focus of maybe a 60-minute session all by itself, and a very worthwhile session as well. Embedding a coaching culture can really help people think about, how can I do something, instead of how can someone tell me how to do something. One of my favorite techniques is reframing the question. I'll give you a quick example of this. Here's a problem that we might face. Our IT isn't fit for purpose. It doesn't work. How can we do our jobs? Well, that is a question, although one might argue it's more of a statement or argument than a question. That's why I've put an exclamation mark there instead of a question mark. But we can reframe it, and we can teach people how to reframe these questions as well. Here's another way of looking at the same issue. How can we adapt? Notice now we're starting to move to a positive way of thinking. And how you ask the question deeply influences and affects how or what solution pops up. So that one in the center there, how can we adapt, is pretty lovely. But what about this? How can we use this as an opportunity to actually drive improvements? Now, when you reframe the question, you change how people are thinking. When you teach them how to reframe the question, you do something really amazing. And those skills, by the way, are useful in work and outside of work as well. I'm constantly having conversations with my 7-year-old daughter and asking her to reframe the question in a more positive way. And she's brilliant at it, as 7-year-olds are so incredibly adaptable. So reframing the question. And of course, linked in with that, we need to allow people to fail. If we're asking people to have growth mindsets, they need to be not afraid of failure. I'll give a little example from the news. Just recently, there has been some more COVID-19 incidents in Beijing. It's caused a partial shutdown of Beijing. My understanding, and I really want to stress this is just my understanding from the news, I wasn't there, I don't know what's happened. My understanding is the authorities have immediately sacked the people who have allowed this to happen. Well, if you want to create a culture of cover-up, that is exactly how you do it. When you hurt people, when you penalize people for making mistakes, you halt innovation, and you halt growth mindsets. When you openly embrace mistakes and look at what you can learn from them, you change the culture and you show people that it's okay to fail. We should never stop trying. So there's some quick tips for enabling a growth mindset as well, which is essential if we want to move from a reactive to a proactive stance. Our next one, people don't have the skills to innovate and problem solve. Well, this one's got quite an easy and quick solution, and people in learning and development, I'm looking at you for this one. This is all about training, training, training. Let's give them the skills to use appreciative inquiry. Let's give them problem solving skills and lateral thinking skills. Let's give them innovation frameworks. Wonderful things happen when you particularly train this out to your managers, who can then run sessions with their teams on solving the problems that are facing those teams immediately. Interestingly, I've been doing this yesterday and over the last week with one of my clients. They've identified 5 or 6 key issues that are affecting them as a department. So what we've done is, instead of trying to solve those issues, we've been running problem solving sessions and getting them to plug those issues into the problem solving tools. And just this morning, I was creating a report, and I think we've probably had about 30 different solutions that had been identified across 3 groups, each of them wonderful, some of them better than others, but each of them with value. So we are teaching people how to solve their own problems. And of course, this feeds in very, very strongly with that embedding a coaching culture as well. Another big issue, when people are working from home or virtually, how do you protect that natural innovation and ideas that happen when people are just having informal conversations? So we often refer to these as the water cooler moments. You know, when someone's having lunch together, when someone is just making coffee, when someone passes each other in the corridor and they start up a light conversation. So how can we protect those natural, informal conversations that can actually be so important to innovation? Help teams find a way to create them. So look at the 2 points above. If we train people to solve problems and we embed the coaching culture and we help managers to help their teams to solve their own problems, then what you get is some wonderful, wonderful outputs on how to protect those innovation points. And again, that's what I've been doing over the last week in particular, is helping an organization to really harness the intelligence that already exists within some of their high performance teams, helping them to solve their own problems. And it's, by the way, it's incredibly rewarding to do that as well, and to see those answers coming back. The last issue we will identify when we're looking at how to move from a reactive to a proactive, how to really celebrate and embrace innovation, is we don't have the time and resources to do this. Hey, Nick, you're asking me to think up new ideas. Do you not realize how busy I am? And this is a big one. This one, we're going to spend a few minutes discussing. And ladies and gentlemen, I apologize in advance because it's going to get a bit dark here. The way we tackle this, particularly from an HR and learning and development point of view, is to try and tackle what we often refer to as the efficiency illusion. The illusion that the more efficient you are, the less headcount you have, the better suited you are, or in the better situation you are. Let me go into a bit more detail here, because there's a whole story to unwrap. First of all, we need to understand how boards are measured, how your CEO, how your trustees, how your exec directors are measured. And often they are measured on what we call the cost to value ratio. For every pound of investment or public funding that goes into that service or company, what do we get out? Let me give you 2 quick examples. First of all, we'll deal with a private organization. So here we have Company A has £10 million in operational costs, and let's say most of that is its staffing costs, and typically, by the way, it would be, and they generate £15 million. Company B, and let's say they do exactly the same, they have the same product or service or something like that, only has £5 million in operational costs, but still generates that £15 million per year. Well, which CEO do you think is doing a better job? Now, if anyone's answering to themselves, well, actually, Nick, it's more complex than that, you are, of course, completely right. But the markets, the financial markets and governments don't always see the complexity. They see a simple equation. Look, this organization has 500 staff, but is doing this. This organization has 1,000 staff, but is doing this. Clearly, one is being well run and the other isn't. And exactly the same equation happens in our public sector services as well. So public service A has 10 million in operational costs and helps 10,000 service users. Public service B has 5 million in operational costs and helps 10,000 service users. Which is the chief executive officer that you're going to give the knighthood to? This is unfortunately how our boards are measured. And it's important for us in HR and L&D not to get angry over this, but to understand it. When we understand it, we can help manage the situation. And we do need to help manage the situation. Here's why. This is the efficiency illusion. So some of you may have seen something called the Eustress curve. It's been around for a long time. And basically it looks at what happens to a human being as their level of challenge or stress, i.e. the targets, go up, and how that affects their performance and productivity. And by the way, where it says performance and productivity on your screen, it could also have said happiness, mental health, and well-being. Let's have a look at how this curve shapes up. Now, it starts off quite low. When people are bored, they are not very productive. And actually, as the right level of stress and challenge ramps up, actually, they get to our peak efficiency, peak performance. But my goodness, look what happens as they go over the end. You see, as soon as you get over what people can handle, their stress response starts to really kick in. We've mentioned this before when talking about well-being. In our stress response, there are chemicals such as cortisol released. Now, cortisol affects your working memory, which means at the time when you need to be firing on all guns and juggling so much, you can't, because you can't hold more than a couple of things in your head. This is where we are often targeted to be. From a short-term point of view, this is where a company or a public service is showing its maximum operational efficiency. But actually, if you want to allow people to think, if you want to allow people to innovate and to move, then you need to allow some flexibility. And from, as it says, an innovation and long-term growth point of view, this is where we need to aim. Now, the interesting thing is the difference here, only about 10%. But that 10% can mean the difference between an organization doing well in the short term and then utterly collapsing later. And again, this is the same for both private and public sector, and an organization thriving in the long term as they actually have the capability to adapt. This is a big thing, ladies and gentlemen, and the chances are it's going to get bigger. The impact of COVID-19 has been huge. Let me share with you a couple of quick statistics that might just help us reflect on what's going to happen to that Eustress curve and resourcing levels over the next 12 to 24 months. First of all, the cost to the government of the COVID-19 response has been 132.5 billion. My source there is the Office of Budget Responsibility, a source I trust quite a lot, and the most recent updated figures I could get on this were from the 4th of June. So this is already over a week old, but crikey, 132.5 billion. Here, let me just put that into perspective for you. Budget for the NHS 2018-2019, 153 billion. This has cost us one NHS budget. So I wonder what the impact is going to be on future budgets. Private sector. Okay, let's have a look at the private sector. Now this is from PwC. So there has been a deep contraction in Q2 by around 20 to 30%. The average growth that PwC are predicting across 2020 ranges from -7% to -13% in our GDP. Again, I'm going to put this into perspective for you because we've We've been in some recessions before. Here's what they look like. The 2008 recession, its peak was Q4 of 2008. And there we had growth of minus 2.1%. And the big recession across 1973 to 1975, I don't know whether you guys remember that or not, that was minus 2.7%. This is bigger than anything we've seen in half a century. Honestly, I do not know what the impacts will be. It's going to depend what government choices are made. Are we going to borrow like crazy and keep things afloat? Are we going to enter another period of austerity? And I don't know. I don't have a future ball so that I can gaze into, a crystal ball, sorry, that I can gaze into the future on and give you answers on that. And I wouldn't pretend I have. What I can say, though, are these are the facts. This is the situation we're facing. So when we're looking at that crunch, it is likely, not definitely, but likely to get worse. And that means that HR teams and learning and development teams quite possibly going to be in a position where they are more important than they have ever been before. I'm sorry again, everyone, if that's got a bit dark, but my job here isn't to sugarcoat things for you. It's to forewarn you and arm you for the future so that you guys can be ready for it, so you can have your strategies in place, so that you can get your own correct training in place around business cases and influencing skills to make sure that you are ready to protect your organizations and your people as well. So that's our first big one. We've spent more time on it than we will on any of the others because everything else is going to kind of feed into this a little bit. And here is a quick summary. There's a summary of the issues that we think we're going to be facing in terms of moving from reactive to proactive, and a quick summary of those answers as well. Nice screen to do a quick control print screen on if you want to. Okay, remember, feel free to keep questions coming. Very, very welcome to do that. This is big stuff, and I know I am covering it quite quickly at the moment as well. Now, linked in with all this is a natural flow to our next big challenge, the challenge of well-being and mental health like we have never done it before. Every year, it's pleasing to see there's more of a focus on this, and again, a lot of diversity and inclusion. It's lovely. It's a real win-win that's happening. But let's have a look at some of our tips and techniques for supporting well-being and mental health in your organizations, because it may well be really needed at the moment. The first one we're going to look at is, or I'm going to suggest, is look at what other organizations like yours are doing. So this comes from the idea of positive deviance. The chances are someone somewhere is encountering exactly the same issue that your particular team, department, or organization is. We live in an age where we can put into Google, how do I manage X? How do I deal with Y? And get some sensible answers as well. So our first tip, connect with other teams, connect with other departments, and ask your industry, ask like-minded souls, what are they doing? And when one person has a great idea, it can be shared across with others. Again, in this last week, that's something that the teams that I've been working with have been doing. And it's had some really great results as well. Help your senior leadership team understand why well-being is so important. And remember, we've got some really nice ethical reasons for this, but we've also got some hard bottom line financial reasons. Present to them the business cases that show just how much it costs an organization, or how fewer service users you can help when people are going off sick. Help them realize the cost of attrition. Put this in a financial business case for them, and it helps them then justify the increased investment in mental health and well-being as well. These aren't in any particular order, by the way, and if they were, I'd suggest that maybe this third one actually might be the most important. Activate your managers. A manager or supervisor holds a very, very special place in almost any organization. They're the people that impact the workforce the largest. They're often therefore the people that we need to support, upskill, and train as much as possible. And you can also, of course, put things such as well-being and resilience into targets and appraisals. If your managers are targeted for not having people off on long-term sick, now you need to be very careful with how you're doing this targeting. It means they actually start to take an interest in well-being and health. So instead of just reacting to, okay, yes, I know I've got to get this task done that usually took 5 people, now I only have 5 people to do it, they can actually have a little bit more support in pushing back on, well, then I need 2 more headcount. So when we do this, we can really support them in their fight for more headcount and more people and reducing the stress. And the single biggest stressor that we are seeing right the way across the public and private sector at the moment is headcount freezes. And of course, we know why those headcount freezes are happening. I refer you back to the efficiency illusion and the Eustress curve. Number 4, make sure that you have policies that support the well-being. Sonali, so I can't see the comment section, but I wanted to say that you all should be training on empathy and compassion to managers and leaders. Brilliant. That is brilliant, Sonali. Build proximity with their people and ask leaders and managers to share their personal reflections and stories and dealings with stress. There you are talking about leaders role modeling vulnerability and openness about mental health. Sonali, excellent suggestion, brilliant suggestion, absolutely. Going back to policies that support well-being. Now, I'm not going to present you a whole range of policies because you're already going to have them. I'm just going to say that sometimes it's the smallest things that can have the biggest difference. Let's take, for example, email. I wonder how many of you right now are working for organizations where some people in the organization, perhaps some senior people, are sending emails late at night. I'm willing to bet that all of you are in that situation. I could be wrong, but I would happily put a financial bet on that. You also know the impact that has on staff. Now, we could say, okay, no one should send an email outside of working hours. I've seen many organizations that have done that, but there's a problem. You see, that policy, SLT is Senior Leadership Team, so abbreviation for Senior Leadership Team, Shivangi. Now, we know that if you put a policy in place that says you can't send an email after working hours, well, what about the people who are thinking about work at 9 o'clock at night after they've put their children to bed? And actually, if they don't write that email now, it goes out of their head or they worry about it. So here's a tip, and again, this came out of the work I've been doing this week. If you want to send an email late at night, go for it. But train your managers and particularly your senior leaders to put in that email, I am only sending this so I know it's sent. You do not need to respond to it immediately. This is to help me. Issa says, what about managers who micromanage their employees? Absolutely. So the same kind of things apply. Ideally, we want to give them training whereby they are building an idea of how they can actually get reports about what their people are doing without micromanaging. And remember, a micromanaging manager is a manager who is drowning. There's a reason for micromanaging. It's not that people are born whereby they absolutely want to see how much they can hurt others and kill initiative. It's because they're desperate to try and see what's happening. And generally we see that the more a team goes under stress, the more likely the manager is to micromanage. By the way, as an aside, you can also train staff to manage micromanagers. And very quickly, you manage a micromanager by micro-reporting to them. Report everything to them. You start to build a feeling of trust and transparency in them. Now, that's a small piece from a really big management and leadership course, but that's perhaps just another quick dive off option for you as well. Make sure you have a culture that supports well-being. It's a big focus point for so many people, and this is about getting it on the radar of the senior leadership team again and making sure you are very, very public about it. Those role modeled examples. Sonali, again, I really love that suggestion about getting leaders to talk about some of the issues that have been affecting them. Some of you may want to explore things like Patrick Lencioni's vulnerability-based trust and how it can boost the authentic brand of a leader. Never be afraid to talk about some of the bad things that are happening to us, because then it encourages others to be open and share about those. And our last quick tip here is to create mental health champions. So we have a lot of diversity champions, a lot of inclusion champions. A mental health champion can be a really positive tool as well. As it says, we need to enable our managers to be able to manage staff in 2020. Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And that is going to be different to how they manage staff in, say, 2015. Now, it's not been just an immediate step change. It is a progression that's happened, but it's definitely one that has happened. Okay, let's move on and see some top tips. Oh, my apologies. Sorry, there's one more bullet point. Make sure, so this is a lovely one as well. It's very difficult to achieve, but it's a lovely one. Get senior representation for your workforce's mental health at the top table. And ideally, don't make this an HR person. Ideally, this should be a workforce champion who's trained up to do that as well. We don't want it to be an HR champion because that can slightly compromise the neutrality that should be in an HR department as well. For HR to be trusted by everyone, both the workforce and the senior leadership team, it needs to sit in this very, very difficult piece right in the middle of the organization. Shivangi has said, what are the leadership qualities to lead corporate development? Shivangi, that is too big to answer right here and now. If you would like to stay on the line after we finish this session, I will do my best to give you, say, a 3 to 4 minute masterclass in this. And I'm very happy to do that as well. I love talking about this. In 2 words, authenticity and purpose. When a leader has those 2 things, they can start to lead corporate development. And I would say everything else can be carried. You do not need to be a perfect leader to drive corporate development. What you need to do is have a brand that is authentic, i.e. credible and believable, and you need to have clear purpose. When you know what you're doing, you engage others with your vision or your calling as well. Hopefully that helps. Feel free to hang around after and I can go into much more detail for you. Okay, protecting a sense of team and connection to organizational culture. Now, I've kind of split this one down into 2 sections, the sense of team and the organizational culture, but they are deeply, deeply connected. Thank you, Shivangi. Lovely. Thank you. So the first thing is with the sense of team. And again, we're coming back to the sense of purpose. Nothing unites people like a sense of purpose. Whether that purpose is to survive or whether that purpose is to thrive, it is a unifying force. So if there is one thing that you take from this session, it's give your people that purpose, or perhaps more accurately, help them realize that purpose. And connected in with that is empower your people, because when they have that sense of purpose and you give them the tools to start solving their own problems, they will solve their own problems. And there isn't a single thing that works for every single team across the world. Every team is unique. So empowering teams to solve their own problems, i.e. creating that coaching culture and training in problem solving and innovation skills and facilitation skills as well, can be a really, really powerful piece. Now, connecting to the organization, this isn't separate from the sense of team, but we thought it might be useful to create some distance between them. Leadership stories and examples where people have actually demonstrated the organization values, they keep the values alive. So if you have senior people giving recognition and actually showing why they think that such and such a person who did this really represented that value, and they're doing it on a town hall meeting, or maybe they're creating a podcast or a short video, that's what keeps these kind of things front and center in people's minds. So we need to keep them in focus for our staff. And that's the difficulty when people are working virtually or across distributed or geographically split teams as well. I'm sure you are all already embedding values and behaviors into targets and appraisals. But if you're not, my goodness, you're missing an easy one there. Not easy to implement, but once it's there, it really, really empowers those values. So most organizations that I'm working with now will run their appraisals on 50% is target achievement, i.e. the what, and 50% is representation of the values and behaviors, i.e. the how. And it's lovely. And it also sends us clear sign and message to every member of the workforce as well. This is important. And a quick tip, it happens a lot in the NHS, but I find it doesn't happen a lot outside of that wonderful, wonderful organization. Values-based recruitment. So it's an extension of competency-based recruitment, and this is give us an example of when you have gone and shown that the customer was the priority to you, or that you placed ethics over targets, or something like that. So maybe that's one for you to research. We can help you with that at ILX, definitely, but also you can, using Positive Deviance, you can just also put it into Google, values-based recruitment. It's absolutely wonderful. We have a blueprint quick guide as well, but it's a really, really wonderful little tool. And for HR teams, it's a great one to start introducing to managers. I find they respond really well when we start training out values-based recruitment as well. So those are our top tips to keep the sense of team and connection to the organization. Again, just that big reminder, and I'm not done with it. I'm going to remind you another few times as we come to the last parts of this session. Nothing unites people like a common purpose. It is so powerful, so ethical, and drives bottom line results as well. So the next piece that we will look at is a little contentious. You're going to know where you are with this, but it's HR as enablers, not controllers. Traditionally, going back 50 years, the HR department was about keeping people safe and protecting the organization from risk. 20 years ago, things were changing enormously, and HR was then about training and driving productivity. And of course, then we get a big strides in the learning and development department as well. There's never been a time, though, when what's on screen now has been truer. So what I'm going to invite you to do is ask yourself, maybe just quietly, maybe just reflectively, these 5 questions. I want to make it clear, I'm not judging you on the answers. Hey, I can't hear the answers. Here's the first one. If you don't, that's okay. Maybe it's time we looked at that. It's a really interesting one. Try and get some anonymous feedback about how what the brand of your HR department is. Excellent. Thank you for sharing and openly answering, Shivangi. I appreciate that. Thank you. Do we have a seat at the top table? This is a big one because a really good HR lead makes sure there's really strong representation in that executive board. And it can be a difficult one if you're working for an organization that isn't used to that. It can be a big, big battle, but it's a game changer, an absolute game changer. So I'm going to read this one out. You'll see why. It's because of the next one. Do we only focus on reducing risk, or do we genuinely seek to enhance and leverage our human capital? And here's our last question to ask. Do we understand that human capital is a cold business term, and what we're really talking about is human beings? Now, I raise this because all too often I see language being used that fascinates me from a psychological point of view, but I know the language is actually quite harmful. When we talk about human capital, we mean people. When we talk about people, we mean human beings. And a little tip, change the language you're using in some of the senior meetings. It means that people start to make stronger connections to actually workforce isn't just about productivity. It's about Sarah and Tom and Sahir and all of these people as well. Absolutely, as SS shares, HR professionals should be taught analytical skills to be able to thrive in the now. And you know what? That brings us actually to our last big challenge as well. Digitization and automation is on steroids. Now, it's too big a subject for me to deal in just a few minutes on this WebEx. So I prepared a couple of quick things for you. First of all, here are 3 lovely videos that you might want to look at if you haven't seen them already. So in the circles are the search criteria you put into YouTube. And I've also taken screenshots of what the actual videos look like when they're being advertised on YouTube. So you know you're picking the right ones as well. But pretty much put in something like digital transformation and you're going to get something that talks an awful lot about the future way of working. But here is my tip to both HR and learning and development. Embrace data analytics and data-driven decision making. And something I was doing about 3 weeks ago was working with a team of data scientists and teaching them how to present their findings to non-data people, i.e. how to take the graphs and the data points and turn them into a persuasive story that lets senior leaders embrace and actually do some action from those points. Okay, that's the big 5 challenges. I'm going to very quickly go through now the 3 questions that seem to be, from what we can tell, on our humans beings minds, those lovely human beings that work for us. So the top 3 questions: is my organization fair and inclusive? Am I valued? Do I have a future here? We have purpose? The first one is very close to my heart and it's very, very current at the moment. So I'm going to talk about Black Lives Matter. Big movement at the moment. At the moment, we had a situation, George Floyd, we saw him on the TV, millions, if not billions of people saw that event happen. And lots of people asked, is this a pattern or a trend? Yes, it is. And that led to the idea that maybe there is a systemic problem here. Now, for those of you who recognize this, of course, I'm now going through Peter M. Senge's systems thinking iceberg, where Peter says, actually, we can think of something as operating on different levels. Now, for me, the underlying structure has led to the protest movements that we're seeing around the world at the moment. And it's beautiful because when people do this, it leads to change. It saddens me, though, because it won't be the main change. We're looking at the wrong level. If there is an underlying structure such as systemic racism in a police force, the real question is, why? What's the mental model that has led to that? And I can tell you that our psychologists, from an academic point of view, we already know the answer to this. It's to do with how one human being categorizes things around them, including other people. If I suddenly showed you a picture of a cup, immediately in your brain, in a split millisecond, there's a whole load of adjectives or labels that appear that help you identify this as an inanimate object, something possibly made of porcelain or plastic or steel, something I drink from. If I showed you a face with a skin color that was different to your own, similar labels start to pop up. They are differentiators. This exists in every human being. And it isn't until we start to tackle these kind of things that actually we can start to manage these situations. Now, I'm losing on time, so I'm going to very quickly just share with you how this might show in an organization doing a D&I program. Single event, they make a public statement about how wonderful they are. Perhaps it's the NFL who previously said that people shouldn't take the knee, saying, oh no, we fully support this, absolutely. Or maybe actually it's a very visible campaign, and that's good because visible campaigns start to move hearts and minds. Or maybe it's where an organization sets up D&I champions. They start to reinvestigate recruitment policies and they employ unconscious bias training. And that is good, that is wonderful, but please note, it still is not hitting the right level. if you want to hit the right level, we need to train people in things like system 1 and 2 thinking and unconscious categorization training. I'll let you go off and do your own investigation there. It is fascinating and incredibly rewarding to start training people around these things though. You know, that's big stuff that I've just covered in about 2 minutes. Really big stuff. So hopefully, again, this is giving you food for thought. And I really want to encourage you, go back and look at this on YouTube when it goes up on Friday, and then you can pause it where you want, stop, have a good mull over those questions, and think about how they apply to you as well. Our next two, am I valued? Well, quick statistics that, again, if you're in HR, you probably know this around job retention. This is the reasons that people leave companies, ladies and gentlemen. 11% rubbish managers, 12% better work-life balance. But overwhelmingly, the biggest single reason that people leave an organization across so many generational points, a lack of career development. And that gives us the single biggest answer as well. Make sure your managers are having career development conversations with your people. Now, you may notice at the bottom, because I like to include these things, the source, and that the survey data is across all working ages and industries. Actually, when you start to narrow that down to, for example, whether you are having a gender imbalance and losing really talented people who identify as female in between the ages of 25 to 35, that 22% skyrockets. It absolutely skyrockets. Career development, a really, really important piece. And our last, the unconscious question that can be on so many people's minds. And it's one that affects mental health, it affects stress levels, resilience, productivity, innovation. It affects every single thing that we have looked at on this WebEx, and it's why it's right at the end. Do I have purpose? HR people, L&D people, if you can unlock or help someone see or identify their purpose, you do truly amazing things. Okay, we've come to the end. I'm going to give you a summary slide and then 2 takeaways. Because we've covered so much, I thought it might be useful if we could just boil it down to just 2 single takeaways for you. So what we have done, we've had a quick look at a bit of the history, 2019 up to 2020. We've had a look at the big 5 challenges that seem to be facing people, and we've done that based on drawing lots and lots of information together. And we've also had a look at 3 important questions that the human beings that work for us are asking. And that leaves me with 2 final takeaway points for you. Number 1, you have purpose. There has never been a time in history when the roles of learning and development and HR have been so important and so impactful. It is an amazing time to be in these departments. And if you are thinking, well, that's not me, I just turn up to work and actually my job is just to take orders, you're in the wrong departments right now. You absolutely are. Because what you do matters. Second takeaway is the practical one. There's one thing you immediately go away and do after this WebEx session. Please, please let it be. Make sure every team has a clear mission and vision, because it is a game changer. Okay, my apologies, everyone. I've gone 6 minutes over, so I'm going to let you guys go now. I'm not in any rush to log off, so I'll happily hang around and answer questions, most definitely. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been useful. It has been a whirlwind tour. So check out the YouTube video when it goes up on Friday, and that'll enable you just to pause and review and stop and rewind and do this at your leisure as well. And you can give me a quick bit of feedback as to whether this was enjoyable and useful. That's quite nice as well. And Tony, I will start to Oh, brilliant, Tony, thank you. You've already shared with me the takeaways here. Systems thinking 1 and 2, value-based recruitment, excellent. So you're taking a lot of stuff there, Tony. That's really, really useful. I'm really, really pleased. I'm really, really pleased. It's nice to see you again as well. I noticed that a lot of people are on these again from the first sessions, and that's really lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Tony, obviously, we may be having chats anyway. I've said that you're very, very welcome to contact me. That's great stuff. Shivangi, thank you. And I hope you make it to your next meeting in time as well. So anyone, feel free to log off now. Feel free to hang around and chat as well. I'm just mindful. Excellent. Thank you, Murray. I'm pleased that that was eye-opening. Yeah, so we focused it on HR and L&D people. It actually isn't this stuff so applicable to anyone in a leadership role, I think. I really, really do. If you are in a leadership role, I think it's good for you to be aware of these things because it does impact leadership enormously, definitely. Good stuff.